The courtroom felt heavy that morning, the kind of silence that presses against the chest before something terrible or unforgettable happens. Wooden benches creaked softly as people settled into their seats, unaware that they were about to witness a moment that would change every assumption in the room. At the center of it all sat an elderly homeless man, his posture calm but worn, his green jacket faded by time and hardship. His beard was long and white, framing a face marked by deep lines that spoke of years far harsher than any judgment could deliver. Across from him stood a sharply dressed lawyer, confident, loud, and visibly amused, the kind of man who believed the courtroom was his stage and everyone else merely an audience. The judge took her seat, the gavel resting quietly, while the American flag behind her stood as a silent reminder of justice and honor, ideals that were about to be tested in ways no one expected. The lawyer adjusted his tie, smirked slightly, and began questioning with a tone that bordered on theatrical arrogance. He spoke clearly, loudly, making sure every word carried to the farthest corner of the room, as if this trial were not about truth but about entertainment. He glanced at the homeless veteran and let out a short laugh, one that echoed uncomfortably. The question started simply enough, about background, about service, about identity, but there was a sharp edge beneath each word. The lawyer leaned forward, eyes gleaming, and asked about the man's military past, already convinced it was exaggerated or entirely fabricated. A few people in the gallery shifted in their seats, sensing the disrespect, but unsure whether to intervene even emotionally. The veteran answered calmly, his voice steady, never rising to match the lawyer's tone. That calm seemed to irritate the lawyer even more. He began pacing slightly, hands gesturing, his confidence growing with every sarcastic remark. Then came the question that changed everything. With a mocking smile, the lawyer asked about the veteran's call sign, dragging out the words as if savoring the insult he was about to deliver. He chuckled and suggested something demeaning, something that reduced the man's entire life to his current appearance. A few nervous laughs rippled through the room, quickly dying as they realized the cruelty of the moment. The veteran did not react immediately. He did not flinch, did not lower his gaze. He simply looked at the lawyer, his eyes carrying a depth that no one in that courtroom could yet understand. The lawyer mistook that silence for weakness. He pressed harder, repeating the question, louder this time, making sure the humiliation was complete. The judge watched closely but did not interrupt, perhaps wanting to see where this line of questioning would lead, perhaps trusting the process too much. The veteran finally spoke, his voice low but clear, filling the room without effort. He said that his call sign was not given lightly, that it was earned, not mocked. The lawyer rolled his eyes, clearly unconvinced, and sarcastically invited him to share it, as if expecting a ridiculous answer that would prove his point. The veteran paused, not for drama, but as if weighing the memories that came with the name. When he finally spoke the words Phantom Hawk, they did not come with pride or arrogance, but with a quiet gravity that caused a subtle shift in the room. Some people frowned, others leaned forward. The lawyer laughed outright, shaking his head, openly mocking the name as if it were taken from a cheap movie. He turned toward the judge, trying to share the joke, but the judge did not smile. The laughter faded faster this time, replaced by a strange unease. The veteran continued speaking, unprompted, explaining that call signs were not nicknames chosen for fun, but titles given by others who trusted you with their lives. His words were simple, but each one landed with weight. He spoke of missions that could not be written in reports, of nights where survival depended on silence, precision, and absolute trust. The lawyer attempted to interrupt, but the judge raised a hand, allowing the veteran to continue. That single gesture shifted the balance of power in the room. The veteran described the origin of the call sign, how it came from an operation where visibility was nearly zero, where enemy lines blurred into darkness, and where one mistake would have cost dozens of lives. He spoke without embellishment, without emotion, as if stating facts long buried, but never forgotten. As he spoke, the atmosphere changed. The courtroom no longer felt like a place of judgment, but like a space holding a collective breath. Even the lawyer stopped moving, his confident posture slowly stiffening. The veteran mentioned dates, locations, details that were too specific, too accurate to be fabricated. A murmur spread through the gallery as a few people recognized the significance of what was being said. Then something unexpected happened. One of the officials seated behind the lawyer, a man with graying hair and a composed demeanor, straightened suddenly. His eyes widened slightly and his hands tightened together. He leaned toward another official and whispered something urgently. The judge noticed the movement and frowned, sensing that the testimony had reached a point beyond ordinary courtroom drama. The veteran finished his explanation with a single sentence, stating that Phantom Hawk was not who he was, but what he had been when others needed him to be. Silence followed, deep and absolute. No one laughed. No one moved. The lawyer swallowed hard, his earlier confidence visibly shaken. He tried to regain control, clearing his throat and making a dismissive comment, but his voice lacked its former strength. Before he could continue, the official who had whispered earlier stood up. He requested permission to speak, identifying himself as a retired military intelligence officer. The judge hesitated only a moment before granting it. The officer addressed the court with measured respect, stating that the call sign Phantom Hawk was known within certain circles, associated with classified operations that had saved countless lives. He explained that details were limited, but the existence of the call sign was not a matter of opinion. A ripple of shock moved through the room. The lawyer's face drained of color. He looked from the officer to the veteran, suddenly aware that the man he had mocked was not a nameless drifter, but someone whose past commanded a level of respect far beyond the courtroom. The judge leaned forward, her expression now serious, almost reverent. She asked the veteran if he was willing to confirm his identity through sealed records. The veteran nodded once, calmly, as if this moment had been inevitable. The lawyer sank back into his chair, hands trembling slightly, realizing that the narrative he had constructed was collapsing. The courtroom, once filled with casual judgment, now held something heavier, something closer to awe. No one spoke as the judge ordered a brief recess to review the information presented. As people slowly stood, whispers filled the air, not of ridicule, but of disbelief. The veteran remained seated, unchanged, his calm intact. He stared ahead, not seeking validation, not enjoying the shift in perception. For him, the past was not a weapon to be wielded, only a truth that existed whether acknowledged or not. The lawyer, however, sat frozen, staring at the table before him. The weight of his own arrogance, pressing down harder than any verdict ever could. The recess ended with a sharp knock of the gavel, pulling everyone back into their seats as if waking from a collective dream. The courtroom felt different now, heavier, charged with an unspoken understanding that something irreversible had already occurred. The lawyer returned to his seat more slowly than before, his shoulders no longer squared with confidence but slightly hunched, as though the room itself had grown heavier on his back. The veteran sat exactly where he had been, hands resting calmly on his knees, eyes forward, expression unreadable. When the judge re-entered, there was no small talk, no casual adjustment of papers. She looked directly at the sealed folder placed before her, then at the veteran, then briefly at the lawyer, whose gaze immediately dropped. The judge began by stating that preliminary verification had confirmed sensitive records, matching the veteran's name and service number. She emphasized that much of the information remained classified, but what could be acknowledged was enough to establish credibility beyond reasonable doubt. A murmur ran through the gallery, quickly silenced by the judge's raised hand. She reminded everyone that the courtroom was a place of law, not spectacle, though the irony of her words was not lost on anyone. The lawyer attempted to stand, perhaps to object, perhaps to speak, but his legs seemed uncertain, and when he finally rose, his voice betrayed him. He began with a forced formality, addressing the judge respectfully, but his words tangled as he tried to regain control of the narrative. He suggested that past service, no matter how distinguished, did not exempt a person from scrutiny. The judge listened patiently, her expression neutral, but her eyes were sharp. When he finished, she asked a simple question: whether his line of questioning had been intended to establish facts or to demean the witness. The lawyer hesitated, and that hesitation spoke louder than any answer. He stammered something about testing credibility, but the judge was not convinced. She reminded him that credibility is tested through evidence and respect, not mockery. The lawyer nodded quickly, muttering an apology that felt more procedural than sincere. The judge then turned to the veteran and asked if he wished to add anything further to his testimony. The veteran paused, then shook his head slightly. He said that he had already said what needed to be said, that the past did not require defense, only truth. His voice carried no bitterness, only a quiet finality. That restraint seemed to affect the room more deeply than any impassioned speech could have. The judge acknowledged his response, and then surprised everyone by asking the retired military officer to remain standing. She requested clarification, within permissible limits, about the nature of the veteran's service. The officer chose his words carefully, explaining that the veteran had been involved in operations that were officially non-existent. Missions that required individuals to disappear, not just from records, but from public memory. He stated that such individuals often returned without recognition, benefits, or support, by design rather than neglect. The courtroom absorbed this information in silence, the implications settling heavily. The judge thanked the officer and dismissed him back to his seat. She then addressed the gallery, reminding them that justice is not only about the present moment, but about acknowledging sacrifices that never made headlines. Her words were measured, but they carried an unmistakable weight. The lawyer sat down slowly, his earlier arrogance now replaced by a visible discomfort, as though he were acutely aware of every eye in the room. The judge proceeded to address the case itself, stating that the testimony had significantly altered the context in which the charges and claims should be viewed. She announced that certain motions filed by the defense would be reconsidered in light of the new information. The lawyer nodded again, this time without protest. As proceedings continued, it became clear that the power dynamic had shifted completely. Every question posed to the veteran was now careful, precise, stripped of any hint of mockery. The veteran answered as before, calmly and directly, never embellishing, never seeking sympathy. His composure contrasted sharply with the lawyer's strained demeanor. At one point, the lawyer attempted to reframe his earlier behavior as aggressive advocacy, but the judge cut him off, stating that advocacy does not require cruelty. That single sentence seemed to echo in the room. Members of the gallery exchanged glances, some shaking their heads, others staring at the veteran with newfound respect. An elderly woman in the back wiped her eyes quietly, though she made no sound. The veteran did not notice, or perhaps chose not to. For him, attention was irrelevant. What mattered had already been said. As the hearing progressed, evidence was presented that further supported the veteran's account. Documents and testimonies that, while carefully redacted, aligned perfectly with his statements. Each confirmation tightened the knot in the lawyer's expression. He scribbled notes, crossed them out, scribbled again, as if hoping to find a path back to control. The judge eventually called for another brief pause. Not a recess, but a moment to allow the court to process the volume of information. During that pause, the lawyer leaned back in his chair and closed his eyes for a brief second. When he opened them, his confidence was gone entirely, replaced by something closer to regret. He glanced at the veteran, perhaps seeing him for the first time not as an opponent, but as a man shaped by forces far beyond the courtroom. The veteran did not look back. When the judge resumed, she addressed the lawyer directly, stating that the court would not tolerate further disrespect toward any witness, regardless of appearance or circumstance. She added that professionalism was not optional. The lawyer stood and issued a formal apology to the court and to the veteran. This time, his voice was quieter, more controlled, but still edged with discomfort. The veteran acknowledged the apology with a slight nod, nothing more. That small gesture seemed to close a chapter, though its impact lingered. The judge then announced that the court would adjourn for the day, with proceedings to continue after a full review of the sealed materials. The gavel struck, sharp and final. As people stood to leave, the atmosphere remained subdued. Conversations were hushed, respectful. Several people glanced toward the veteran, some with admiration, others with a kind of shame. The lawyer gathered his files slowly, his movements deliberate, as though each paper weighed more than before. He avoided eye contact as he exited, his earlier bravado completely stripped away. The veteran rose last, steady on his feet despite his age. For a moment he paused, looking around the courtroom, not with triumph, but with a distant, reflective gaze. Then he turned and walked out, disappearing once more into a world that rarely recognized the ghosts it had created. The following morning, the courtroom filled more slowly than before, as if everyone entering understood that what remained was not just procedure, but resolution. There was none of the casual chatter that often preceded a hearing. People took their seats quietly, eyes forward, carrying the weight of what they had witnessed the day before. When the veteran entered, a subtle change rippled through the room. No one stared openly, yet respect hung in the air, unspoken but undeniable. He took his seat with the same calm presence, unchanged by the attention or the gravity now attached to his name. The lawyer entered moments later, noticeably altered. His suit was the same, but his demeanor was not. He walked with restraint, his eyes focused on his notes, his jaw tight, as if rehearsing words he hoped he would not have to say. When the judge took her seat, the room settled instantly. She reviewed the case file in silence for a long moment, then looked up, her expression firm but thoughtful. She began by stating that after reviewing the sealed records overnight, the court had gained sufficient clarity regarding the veteran's service and credibility. She emphasized that while much would remain classified, the truth of the man's past was no longer in question. That statement alone seemed to release a collective breath from the room. The lawyer stood when prompted, this time without theatrics. His questions were brief, precise, almost cautious, as though every word carried risk. He avoided anything that resembled personal commentary. It was clear that his strategy had shifted from domination to damage control. The veteran answered as he always had, calmly, truthfully, without embellishment. There was no sense of victory in his tone, only closure. At one point, the lawyer faltered, losing his place, and paused longer than necessary. In that pause, something human surfaced. He looked at the veteran and spoke, not as an opponent, but as a man confronting the consequences of his own choices. He admitted, carefully but audibly, that his assumptions had been wrong. The courtroom grew still. The judge did not interrupt. The lawyer continued, acknowledging that he had allowed prejudice to guide his approach, mistaking hardship for weakness. It was not a dramatic confession, but it was real, and that made it powerful. When he finished, he sat down slowly, as if relieved to have finally spoken without armor. The judge nodded once, then addressed the court. She spoke about dignity, about how justice demands humility as much as authority. She reminded everyone present that service does not always come with medals or recognition, and that some sacrifices are designed to be invisible. Her words were not poetic, but they were precise, carrying the weight of principle rather than emotion. She then delivered her ruling, carefully outlining how the evidence and testimony had reshaped the case. The outcome favored the veteran, not as an act of sympathy, but as a matter of law and fact. The decision was final. The gavel struck, and with that sound, the long arc of tension finally broke. No one cheered. No one spoke. The silence this time was different, not heavy, but respectful. As people began to stand, something unexpected happened. The military officer from before rose and approached the veteran. He did not salute, did not draw attention. He simply extended his hand. The veteran accepted it, their grip firm, brief, meaningful. A few others followed, quietly, offering nods, murmured words of respect. Even the judge paused as she passed, offering a look that conveyed more than words ever could. The lawyer remained seated for a moment longer, watching the scene unfold. When he finally stood, he approached the veteran hesitantly. He stopped a few steps away, unsure. Then he spoke not loudly, not for the room, but for the man in front of him. He apologized again, this time without formality, without defense. He admitted that the courtroom had taught him something no law school ever had. The veteran listened, then nodded once. He did not forgive aloud, did not condemn. He simply said that understanding was enough. That was all. Outside the courtroom, daylight filtered through tall windows, casting long shadows across the floor. The veteran walked alone down the corridor, his steps steady. For a brief moment, someone might have mistaken him for just another old man leaving a government building. And perhaps that was fitting. He had never sought recognition. His life had been shaped by duty, not applause. As he reached the exit, the noise of the city crept back in, TR*.